is what I love about Judicial Watch's lawsuit. We're trying to protect all citizens and all voters. We have lawsuits that are ongoing to try to clean up the rolls in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Colorado. And we've warned other states and counties in New York and Oregon, California, that they got to clean up their rolls. I mean, 12 million names on the rolls in the counties we looked at. And these counties have removed 33 names in total over the last 4 years under the law. It should have been tens of thousands of names they were removing. So there's a lot of work to do. We're doing it. Another thing you hear about the left is how the Republicans are trying to rig the elections by gerrymandering. Now, gerrymandering is the system or is the process. It's a way of describing redistricting. It's a pejorative word for redistricting. And redistricting happens every 10 years, at least with respect to congressional districts, in response to census numbers. And so the state legislatures do that. And gerrymandering is kind of the abuse of redistricting, where you see these ridiculous maps that don't make any sense. They, in the case that we're going to talk about in Maryland, one observer said it looked like a pterodactyl on the map. And the question is redistricting legal? I mean, gerrymandering legal? Now, Democrats have said that the Republicans are abusing their power to gerrymander people and districts based on race improperly or other improper factors. So there are all these political fights and lawsuits going on, and I'm sure the Republicans are unhappy with Democrat gerrymanders as well. You know, in my view, politics and redistricting go hand in hand. The majority party that runs the legislature of the state is typically going to try to set up a system that benefits their party. And the question is, do they do that within reason, or do they abuse their power? And in the case of Maryland, it looks like they abused their power. I'm going to show you the map. I'm hoping we can put it up. I'm going to show you the map. Take a look at it. So you can see this Maryland gerrymander. I mean, do those districts look normal to you? Do they look any way based on communities or mutual interests within a state? Of course not. One of the gerrymander districts in Maryland is connected by the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, which is, I think, a 3-mile wide long bridge. You know, imagine that being your connection to your fellow members, your fellow citizens. You're the other side of the giant Chesapeake Bay. It's like being on the other side of an ocean. That's the way. That's what's been going on in Maryland. Maryland's been notorious for years on this. We had tried to sue before. Now we're suing again under the state constitution. We're representing voters in each of the 12 districts in Maryland. And the grounds are that it diminishes their rights to participate in elections for the U.S. Congress on an equal basis with other Maryland voters. I mean, if you're crammed into a district where your vote is essentially nullified, or it's not appropriate. The goal of redistricting is to make sure that voters in the end are able to pick their politicians, their elected representatives, as opposed to the politicians picking who the voters are and rigging the system that way. The lawsuit details that we filed last month that Maryland's recent history of partisan gerrymandering is no secret. As I said, in 2011, their congressional map remained one of the most notorious partisan gerrymanders in U.S. history. A federal district court openly doubted that it could provide, quote, fair and effective representation for all citizens. Another called it absurd to suggest that there was a community of interest in a district described as a Warshart-like eyesore. A federal appeals court famously described the same district as a broken-winged pterodactyl lying prostrate across the center of the state. So think of the map of Maryland. Think of the panhandle of Maryland, Western Maryland, which is very different than the district Montgomery County, Maryland, which is just here in Washington, D.C., or just outside of Washington, D.C. We have districts that connect the far rural part of the state with the most some of the most urban areas. And the irony is, what they do is they treat Black people as pawns in these gerrymanderings, because for Democrats who controlled Maryland, Democratic voters are key, and because American Blacks tend to be mostly Democrat, they're very valuable in redistricting fights. So they take Black communities and put them in districts to help white liberal congressmen get reelected. So you have Black communities in Baltimore being stuck with communities far from them, and it's not the same community. So the irony is, it discriminates against voters of all races, of all parties. And that's what I love about Judicial Watch's lawsuit. We're trying to protect all citizens and all voters. Now, there was a commission in Maryland that came up with a little bit more of a sensible plan, but that was rejected. So the legislature, which is controlled by Democrats, did what they wanted to do. And, again, I'm not naive. I understand politics comes into redistricting. And but in this case, it was an abuse of power, given the nature of the districts. The lawsuit details how the map distorts district lines, deviates from, and crosses existing political boundaries, and fractures and divides communities of interest. Maryland's plan splits Anne Arundel County into three congressional districts. Anne Arundel is a county, as I said, near the congressional, near the Chesapeake Bay. It's near where the Naval Academy is. The middle of Anne Arundel County is connected to the Eastern Shore's first congressional district. The Eastern Shore is the shore of Maryland. The two areas are held together solely via the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Baltimore is divided among three congressional districts. This is what I was talking about, having Black communities eviscerated by these districts. Montgomery County is divided among four congressional districts. Montgomery County is a big county. Well, I think it's the biggest in the state outside of Baltimore. A roughly 20-mile trip north on the Baltimore-Washington Parkway from Cheverly, Maryland, a DC suburb, to Jessup, Maryland, an area just outside Baltimore, would cross congressional boundaries 6 times and lead a traveler through 5 different congressional districts. So just think, you go 20 miles, you go through 6 congressional districts on one highway. There's an umbilical cord designed to include Democrat voters in College Park to counterbalance the more Republican voters in the southern part of the state. So College Park is up near here in Washington, D.C. So to help Democrats down south in Maryland, where it's more conservative, they took a bunch of voters from College Park and stuck them in a place that they probably would never travel to. It just goes on and on. I told you about the panhandle of Maryland being tied to Montgomery County as well, just in the opposite direction, south to north. As a federal court commented about a district in 2011, which had similar problems that we're talking about, it brings together voters who have no interest in farming, mining, tourism, paper products, paper production, and the hunting of bears, with voters who abhor the hunting of bears and do not know what a coal mine or paper mill even looks like. These two groups have different climates, root for different sports teams, and read different newspapers. I think the equivalent would be putting, I know the distance is much greater, but it's the equivalent, putting counties around Buffalo in a district near New York City. 2 areas of the same state that are worlds apart. And we argue that the plan violates the Maryland Constitution, which guarantees voters the right to free and frequent elections and the right of suffrage. Article 7 has been held to even be more protective of rights of political participation than the provisions of the federal Constitution. And there's Article 3 of the Maryland Constitution, and you should look at your state constitutions to see what rights it protects. Because everyone knows generally, if you're politically active, what the Constitution protects at the federal level, but you should see what your state protects as well. Article 3, Section 4 says, each legislative district shall consist of adjoining territory, be compact in form, and substantially equal population. Due regard shall be given to natural boundaries and the boundaries of political subdivisions. So I want to put up the map of that Maryland district redistricting map again. So does that map look like it has adjoining territory, compact? I guess substantially equal populations almost have to happen. Natural boundaries and the boundaries of political subdivisions? No, of course not. You can see that. So this lawsuit, which we just filed, and we should know relatively soon whether it's going to go forward, seeks to protect the rights of all voters and citizens, and simply makes the point that politicians, as I said, shouldn't be able to pick their voters. It needs to be the other way around. So this is, you always hear the left complaining about redistricting by evil conservatives who are targeting people based on race, when in fact the most abusive redistricting that in the country right now looks to be in Maryland. And it's being run by the left and their partisan allies. And Judicial Watch is stepping up. And of course, the Justice Department pretends to be interested in issues like this, but because it is partisan and corrupt, it's going to ignore it. And Judicial Watch has to come in and try to vindicate the rule of law in Maryland, not only on this election matter, but other election law cases.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.